Even teach us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so this week's parsha, or later week tomorrow, is a double parsha, Parshat Matot Maseh, and two halachas from Parshat Matot. The first one is Matot or Matos, depending how you pronounce it, is a vow or a neder. And if you say to someone, I swear by Hashem, then you have to stick by it. So it's a very serious thing that can only be annulled by a beis din. They can only, and that's why we do this annulment of the vows Erev Rosh Hashanah. So we'll be clear, so that we won't be liable, or we won't have to hold by these vows. So a practical example of this is if I say I won't eat meat, I then I can't eat meat. It's serious. I can't be. If I actually mean it, then I should. I have. I can't go back on my word. It has to be annulled by a beis din. And the second, which basically says what words mean a lot, and they hold a lot of value. So one has to be careful not to say, "I will do X, Y, Z for something," and you don't do it. Rather, say, "I will try." Then the second halacha is a prohibition of eating undedicated produce, which is not given to the temple. So, and not there for so the example is a farmer's fourth year grape harvest in Israel is Kadesh, is holy. He can't sell or eat these grapes. They must be either brought to Jerusalem or deemed onto coins before consumption. So that doesn't really apply to us because we're not in farming or agriculture, but these are two halachot from the first half of this week's double parsha.
Okay. Thanks, Kev. Perfect. All right, let's just get to the bottom line. It's just going to be to get us into it. So obviously, the distinction in the Mishnah, just to summarize, in the first three cases and the last three, is whoever kills inadvertently while engaged in a downward motion is exiled. But if he kills while he was engaged in a motion that was not downward, he is not exiled. And we just said in summary, guys, because it's been a week for some of you, is that Shmuel had a source in Bamidbar chapter 35, verse 23, and he said that um, the verse, if you read it, in Numbers it says, and he caused the object to fall down, and he killed him, and he died. He's not sentenced to exile unless it fell in the way things customarily fell. And how do things fall? Generally downward, with gravity. So we just said that there's a klal and a prat. Prat is a specific case where if somebody's pushing up, according to Aidan's question 2 weeks ago, their body weight times two, it's obviously not going to fly. And in that sort of irresponsibility, they'll be held liable if anybody dies as a result. That's gross negligence based on the improbability of it happening. But generally, it's common for descending objects to cause damage because that's the nature of heavy objects to fall with gravity. And therefore, in a general rule, that's your personal responsibility to make sure that everything is in order during the descent and your equipment is checked. And therefore, failure to exercise greater caution is uh, uh, will result in exile. That's certainly not a question under most circumstances. Okay, and then we said, okay, that makes sense. Um, and then what we said is, as far as Tosfot is concerned, well, we're going to get to there. So when you look at the Brisa, there are two different terms used by the Torah to describe the type of accidental killing for which exile is decreed. Okay, in other words, these are the two categories. Um, Now, the first one is in Bamidbar chapter 35, verse 15, a little bit before the pasuk that Shmuel uses to say that descending objects have greater culpability. And the reference in the Torah is bishgaga, which means inadvertently. And then the second reference is bilvi da'at, which means without awareness, and that's in Devarim chapter 19, verse 4. And this is what you can learn from the Brisa, is that if you're using this term bishgaga inadvertently, it excludes one who kills deliberately because it makes a comparative. What does deliberately mean? If you have full awareness of the crime and a conscious disregard for the law. In other words, you know what you're doing is wrong, and you know it's illegal and immoral. So that's actus rea, the actual action of the crime, and you've got mens rea, the intent behind it. So we went through the different levels of culpability. So that's the first, and then you've got a slightly different issue, and this is Bavli da'at, which is without awareness. And what does that exclude? One who murders intentionally. So it's giving a stark contrast of opinion. So I'm just doing this mainly for Gavin Simpson and Aidan, just to uh, reintroduce them to the concept. Is that the Gemara firstly wants to know, is it even necessary to exclude a deliberate murderer? Because if you're saying that in a compared to a state of unawareness, in that particular case, or inadvertently, if you're comparing it to deliberate murder, you shouldn't even have a question on deliberate murder because that person is subject to execution. And you remember we had this discussion with Tosfot and said, what if the person gets off on a technicality? So there are two responses there. The one is that if the court knows that they're guilty, in certain cases they gave them the barley treatment where they were caged up, starved, and then fed barley and water, and their stomach burst. In the other case, they are not subject to the city of exile because they don't deserve such a atonement in this world, and they're not protected from the Goel Adam, which means the relatives that are looking to seek vengeance. So they're basically susceptible the entire life to being on super awareness because they can be killed at any time legally by the relatives. Okay, so what sort of technicality? We always said if there's two witnesses and they happen to be related, a father and a son in a coffee shop, they can't testify about the same case. Two brothers, that was the classical case, if there's no premeditated warning, etc., etc. So how can you say it's even a question? Because a deliberate murder is subject to execution. Then we had this whole discussion with Rabbah and Abaya, and Rabbah says that when you're using this word uh, inadvertently, bishgaga, what it excludes from the penalty of exile is one that who says it's permitted to murder. So Abaya asked of Rabbah, if the exemption refers to one who thinks a crime is permitted, he's actually equivalent to one who committed a crime accidentally, and therefore he can't be held responsible for something that he didn't know was forbidden. So how can the Brisa refer to him as a deliberate murderer by comparison? So therefore it's using that opposite ends of the extreme to show, according to Abaya, that anybody that thought something was legal is equivalent to somebody that might have had the intent to do a particular act but didn't know it was prohibited. And we use two proper examples. The one is if somebody takes this, the person that breaks Shabbos is subject to the death penalty, and they decide to be a Pinchas by reading last week's the Pasha 2 weeks ago. Then and he's not even aware that it has to go through the Sanhedrin process. According to Abaya, that particular person is certainly not liable because they didn't think what they did was halachically prohibited. So if you want to take a more modern extreme, because you could say that, well, that's a little bit ignorant. We used the example of medical assistance in dying in Canada, at which Canada has been very, very lax in allowing for euthanasia. But the UK, for example, has been much more stringent. So if you've been practicing as a doctor in Canada for 20 years and suddenly you don't realize in certain cases the amount of morphine distribution for an oncology patient might have been a bit excessive in terms of the law, should you be liable legally? We're not talking moral here for the euthanasia aspect. So we're just using a modern example. So that's a buyer's view that it's bordering on ignorance. And Rabbah says it's no excuse. Why? Because if you think a crime is permitted and you fail to do research beforehand, then it's actually closer to deliberate than accidental because you knew that you were killing. It's not as if it was a case where you were playing around with a friend wrestling and he hit his head on the coffee table. In that case, you had no idea what the consequence would be. Here, you're choosing to kill, you just don't realize that it is halachically prohibited in this particular case. So he holds by the Yom Kippur davening that ignorance is no excuse and that there's full culpability. Okay, now we're going to contrast that with the case of this Bavli Da'at as opposed to Bishkaga. Bishkaga is inadvertently. Bavli Da'at is a case of without awareness. And what is the comparison? Is that it excludes one who murders intentionally. Okay. So you could say, but if you, so let's just give you an example. I mean, the Gemara is going to repeat the same argument. Is what do you mean that somebody that's an intentional murderer should be compared? Because what happens to an intentional murderer? He's liable to execution. So obviously, in comparatively, one murders intentionally isn't going to go to the city of refuge. That's a given. Um, so we're just saying that how could you provide the same sort of contrast here? It's obvious that that person gets the death penalty. So whether it was a case of intentionally or deliberately, the fact of it is why is that used as a comparative? And we answered the question before because Abaya said to Rava, yes, he did kill intentionally, but he thought halachically it was permitted. And therefore, there's not there might have been the actus rea, but there's not the mens rea in terms of thinking what he did is illegal. Now, as far as this case of Bishka Bivli Da'at without awareness, Rabbah's got a more stringent view. He said, what does it exclude? It excludes from exile the following types of intentional killings: a person who intended to kill an animal and mistakenly killed a human being, a one who intended to kill a Kutat but instead killed a Jew, or one intended to kill a non-viable infant, but instead killed a fully developed infant. A couple of clarifications. No one's allowed to kill a non-Jew. The point of it here is the Sanhedrin will not put to death a Jew for killing a non-Jew. They're not saying it's permitted, but it's not for the Sanhedrin to do it. Whether or not he'll be extradited to a different court wouldn't be in this particular case. It might have occurred in Rome, but not in this case because the Assyrian king brought them from that city to settle in Samaria and Judea to replace the 10 tribes of Israel. So they were under that sort of jurisdiction. Um, so what if you intend to kill an animal and you kill a human being? We need to just go through that. And the non-viability of an infant compared to a fully developed infant. We are obviously talking in times when there were no incubators and there was no way to ensure that the medical technology would keep a infant going that had been born prematurely to the same degree that it is now. So what happens is, say for example, that he wanted, it's not in the, he wanted to abort at the point where it could be in danger for the mother's life. And in that particular case, there are even questions with regards to a fully viable fetus. The life of the mother takes precedence, but say it was a rape case or something like that, but they judged the viability, and he either calculated the wrong date or this infant had super genetics and seemed to be physiologically fully developed to the point of viability. So in that case, the intent is to kill, but the intent is not to kill in the manner that you intended to kill. Either you killed somebody else by mistake, or somebody that you weren't halachically liable to have the death penalty for, and you ended up killing somebody that you are halachically incumbent to get the death penalty for. But because of the accidental nature of it, about whom you intended to kill, um, you don't go to the city of refuge. Okay. Um, so that in actual fact, even though you intended to kill, the killing which actually was committed was unintentional. So there's an argument between Rabbah and Abaya that Abaya is saying that he should be sentenced to exile because in that particular case, it was unintentional, the person that you killed. As far as Rabbah is concerned, in that particular case, um, you should go to the city of you shouldn't go to the city of exile because you don't deserve the atonement. So, in other words, it's no way lessened by the fact that the killing he intended was not subject to execution by the court. Even when he intended to kill an animal, guys, as you know, that's permissible. A person must be aware of the possibility of striking a human. So, if he does kill a human, he's not classified as shoigig, but close to deliberate. So, we had this question, and Aidan and Gavin Simpson didn't hear the answer. So, initially, what came about was as follows: is Aidan, the question that we left with when you stopped coming in, Gavin, was that how can Rabbah say that if you killed an animal at which there's no death penalty, then if you killed a human being by mistake, you are liable to the death penalty because you didn't intend to kill a human being? How's that different to an accidental killing at which you go to the city of refuge? Because if Rabbah says you excluded from the city of refuge because there's no atonement for you in this world by going to the city of refuge, and it's that severe, nor are you protected from the Goel Adam, the victim's relatives, he's judging this very stringently. So how would you and Gavin Simpson feel that such a thing is possible? I just want to hear your point before I tell you the clarification we had. And then we're going to go into news.
Um, so do you go based off of the actual crime that was committed, not the one that was not the thing that the guy intended to happen?
Just repeat what you're
Is
saying
that
so I
what you're
can
saying?
understand it.
So does the person get sentenced based on the action that they actually managed to do, not the action they intended to do? Is that correct?
Okay, so I'll tell you now, where's your uncle? Is he on? I know he's not on camera. Is he still there somewhere?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, all right, as long as you can still hear us. You don't have to show yourself on TV. It's only for the brave. Um, uh, not
Mhm.
a not a problem. Okay, so I get what Aidan's point. What constitutes liability? Is that what you're saying? Is it action or
Oh no, I was just clarifying how the person gets judged
okay?
before I give an on answer.
Okay, and Gavin, what's your thought?
So between the two different cases, I mean, the one case over here is intentionally trying to kill a particular human being, then messes up and kills another human being. But the action for that is, is death for the intention of killing either human being. So whereas with accidental, he didn't mean to kill a human being, so the action didn't require a death penalty or even exile. Well, maybe then it could be exile, but the intention mattered, I suppose. I suppose when you get exile, it's the intention has to be b'shogeg, or no intention, that is.
Okay,
But when
so
it comes to Mazid,
this is what adds to the confusion, and this is what I wanted to clear up. If you looked at the Gemara had two examples. The example that it had, um, with regards to Bishgaga inadvertently. Okay, it uses the example of, according to Abaya, why he said to Rabbah that he should get off the hook, is that he did kill. He knew he was killing. He absolutely knew he was killing, and he made the action of killing. So that's to answer Aiden's question. And in fact, on that basis, that is why Rabbah says he absolutely doesn't deserve to go to the city of refuge, because he doesn't deserve the protection from the family's relatives from killing him, nor does he deserve the atonement aspect of the city of refuge, because that's exactly as Gavin Simpson said, bemazed, which is almost like a deliberate murderer. In other words, he intended to kill, and he killed. There was the intention and the action. There was actus rea and mens rea. And in that particular case, Rabbah says, of course, he doesn't go to the city of refuge. He's almost like a deliberate murderer. In other words, there's two reasons you don't go to the city of refuge, Aiden. The one reason is that it's bordering on accidental, and the other one is bordering on gross negligence. Okay? Uh, does that make sense? In other words, one would exclude you from mercy, and one would exclude you because it's bordering on the deliberate. Now, what this classic case in the Gemara is that if you're chopping down a tree and you've checked your equipment, not if you were negligent and the axe handle fell off and killed another Jew, you would go to the city of exile then because you killed another human being. It's on that basis that you go there. It's not like you were negligent with your equipment. But since a death occurred, there is an atonement aspect where your life is almost put on pause until the Kohen Gadol dies, and you deserve the protection from the Goel Adam, because it's not like you didn't check your equipment. So that is almost the perfect case at which you get exile. These are two cases, so you need inadvertence and you need almost a case of unawareness. So what's the inadvertence and unawareness? Is that you weren't necessarily aware that there was somebody else in the forest with you, and to a certain extent, the inadvertence was you inadvertently killed somebody, but you didn't aim for them, or you didn't direct your aggression towards them with a weapon. So in that particular case, um, it would fill both of the criteria. The problem in the Gemara that comes up is you say, well, hang on, how come Abaya and Rabbah have the two different opinions? Because Abaya says if there's a case of inadvertently, it would get the person off the hook because they didn't know what they did was halachically prohibited. Now, the reason why I'm using halachic is the grounds that the Sanhedrin can convict the person on. And since he didn't know, it's almost a state of ignorance. So yes, he did kill, but he thought he was doing a mitzvah by killing somebody that broke Shabbos. He thought he was like Pinchas. And the only reason I use this example of euthanasia is that's a legal case today where there are different laws throughout the world. And therefore, it could change without you being aware that there has been a slight nuance change in the law, and how much morphine is determined almost merciful pain removal, and how much is bordering on to the extent that the organs will just collapse with the amount of chemotherapy and radiation that patient has undertaken. So therefore, that's a case where probably intended to kill the patient, but he did it as a way to stop this person being in an inordinate amount of pain. And Canada would say yes, and the UK not. So that's the first.
But you could add to
yeah, okay.
You could add to that, James, because that particular person would be defined as a treifa. And we learned previously the person defined as a treifa, he's walking dead. So it's actually it complicates things a lot more.
That's exactly why I'm using a secular legal case and I'm not going into the halachic matters. I'm just using a pure example of when you could think something is legal as a doctor. That's why we're not bringing any case of traffic, etc. We're just talking about how would a physician operate in different countries in Europe. We're purely taking a legal case because the Sanhedrin can only convict you on the legalities to a certain extent, which is why if it's beschuldigt, not beschuldigt, Grom, indirect, then it's very, very difficult, although you're held totally responsible in Shemaim. So the reason why I'm using euthanasia is not from a halachic standpoint of how to analyze it, but simply how something can be allowed in one country and not allowed in another. That's the only context I'm using this in. But it's a relevant
Cool.
point, but not for here as an example. We're just saying how one could think, because you could think, how can somebody be a moron to think that killing somebody is okay? That's your first superficial look on this. And the look on it is, well, if somebody adheres to the Torah purely on a literal basis, an eye for an eye implies as if that's the Chumash directive instead of monetary compensation. So I was merely using euthanasia as an example of secular law and the differences between different European countries of what you could think would be allowable in terms of dosages, etc. Do you get what I'm saying? And let's just take another case. Mr. Simpson, while we're at it, the law was postponed to 2027 because they define pain in Canada as mental illness. So if somebody feels every day that they're in excruciating mental pain because they suffer from schizophrenia, bipolar depression, borderline personality disorder, and a whole cocktail of special psychiatric issues, maybe they don't want to live anymore. And people could get away with euthanasia on a legal basis on that description. Because the minute you say it's to end bad quality of life, what is the definition of bad quality of life? Do you get what I'm saying? You get where it gets murky. Then maybe somebody's not terminal, but they react with bodily pain on an accident where every moment is excruciating. Is that determined a quality of life? And the reason why the legislation was just put on pause in terms of alternatives to terminal illness is because these are all grey areas that got out of control in Canada. And does this, Gavin Simpson, does this help you a bit to just understand? I'm just using an analogy to illustrate a point, not the trophy aspect. That's why I brought these last couple of points quickly.
No, absolutely, all good.
So a biased position is not ignorance is bliss, but ignorance shows that there was no malintent and he thought it was legal. He thought it was legal. It's like somebody that carries their their ID number instead of their driver's license and think that's suitable to identify a driver. And then they find out in the country, no, it's a separate document. Okay. And as far as Rabbah is concerned, he's not buying it. He said, if you want to do something as heinous as kill somebody else or take out somebody's eye because somebody took out your brother's eye and you don't find out about the law, there's full responsibility. So if you contrast that, and it's because of that deliberate sort of murdering aspect that you don't deserve the city of exile as a refuge protection nor as a kapora, you understand Rabbah's point of view. You also understand the buyer's point of view in terms of the fact that this person thought he was doing what was legal and that he was a tzaddik and doing something that was halachically allowable. Because why? He read the Pasha 2 weeks ago. He sees everybody's breaking Shabbos, and he figures at the end of the day, he's doing the right thing. Because God's going to bring what do you call it, a disease upon people, and he's spiritually saving them, and they have to give up the life in order to spiritually be saved. Who knows? So the thing of it, those are the two schools of thought. The question that we had last week with you is I turned around and said, how could you possibly think that if you were legally allowed to kill an animal, that extending it to killing a human, because Rav Simcha Steinhaus said you had mens rea, you had the intent to kill, so therefore you had the intent to kill. So you killed an animal and you happened to kill a person, but your intent was still there. So although it was misdirected, you deserve to go. It's so heinous you don't even deserve to go to exile. And I said to him, well, it doesn't make any sense. You can kill an animal. So if anything, you can say, well, surely if they killed this person by misdirecting, he should at least be able to have the protection and atonement aspect of exile. And he just said his head was busy. His head was busy preparing in his particular sugya, and therefore he couldn't attend to it. So I asked Rabbi Aran Cohen, and Rabbi Aran Cohen said you have to see Rabbi's point of view from a different perspective. And that perspective is that In a case where you're in the forest, you checked your equipment, you whacked a block of wood with, guys, let me just pause the show for 1 second. Just hang on. Okay, so you take a block of wood, you check your equipment, and you whack down in the wood. The axe handle goes flying off, and it kills somebody. Now, with that default position, was anybody at fault if you checked your equipment? Yes or no? Yes or no? Simpson, Aiden, and others, no. Are you at fault?
No, I mean, but you actually are because you get extra, but that's so slight, but you still get extra. You are at fault still.
Okay, so there is a degree of negligence, but you're not negligent bordering on deliberate. Where your
Mm.
negligence lies, and this is what Rabbi Cohen said, is that you should never utilize equipment when there's somebody else in your vicinity. Okay, now this is normal equipment you checked. You followed safety protocol, but the minute somebody could be in your radius and you're doing something that perhaps could be dangerous, even if you check your equipment, a Jewish life was lost, and therefore you need that atonement of putting your life on pause, and you need to be protected against the relatives taking vengeance. It's not your fault. You checked the X. So if that is such an extreme response to a Jew losing his life because of the potential of a Jewish life actualized with mitzvahs and Torah, then in a case when you're pointing a gun at a buffalo and you idiotically kill a human that looks like a buffalo, or you kill a human there, a gun is very dangerous. A gun is very dangerous, and therefore that's not like an axe that you check that the handle and the head of the axe was intact. And it was still a bit dangerous because you can't do it in a place where other people are allowed to be. A forest is a communal place. So in that case, that is for sure negligent bordering on the deliberate. And therefore you don't deserve the atonement of exile, nor do you deserve, according to Rabbah, being protected from the victim's relatives. Do you get what I'm saying? So on that basis, Rabbah says you're liable. Gavin, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but
It's not your fault. It's purely the ANC. Don't worry about it.
okay. What does that stand for? Ain't no connection. I'm just kidding.
It's yes, ain't no connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep it ain't no connection because we want to be, we want to stay on YouTube and not get kicked off. All right, carry on.
Exactly. So all we are saying, according to Rabbah's opinion, is that if the default position is exile, when you checked your equipment, but the negligence is that there was another Jew around when you were doing some activity that could, in fact, statistically create an accident, but it wasn't dangerous equipment and you checked, and a Jew dies, your life goes on pause and you're protected from the victim's relatives. That's all we said, Gavin. And in the case of Rabbah, if you're shooting a firearm at a buffalo and you accidentally kill another Jew, that is grossly negligent, even if you didn't mean to kill the person, because what are you doing with a firearm? What are you doing with a firearm? It's far more dangerous. According to Abaya, the reason you don't go to the city of refuge is because there's no mens rea, there's no intention to kill a person. Yes, it was negligent, but there was no intent. So that's to answer Aiden's question. They're both holding slightly different views in terms of intent and action. You see that, Aiden. So does that make sense? So the classic case is fourfold. For a premeditated murder, death penalty. For something that the base then determines a complete accident, at which you run to the city of refuge the minute somebody dies. They sent the Sanhedrin sent court-appointed security to collect you. If they deem you at having a complete accident, then in that particular case, the family can't kill you, the Goel Adam. They can't take vengeance. They're not allowed to. And then you don't go to the city of refuge. If there's negligence to the degree that it's in a public area, and even though you checked your equipment, it could be a possible situation of safety, then there is negligence enough to have not cost that life if you'd have been very, very scrupulous. But you did check your equipment. If you didn't check your equipment, you could be liable not to get the protection or atonement of the city of exile, which would be bordering on deliberate. All right, guys, I hope I answered all your questions. Next, tomorrow's new material. Any questions by anybody? You've got 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, you didn't answer those 2 questions I asked when I was offline, but it's fine.
Okay. Lance, what's your question?
Just the city of refuge, okay?
Yeah.
So is it, if you go there, does that by itself give you the safety of the city, or must you go there and then still get a court to say that you're justified in being there?
Great question. Run to the city. There are 42 cities in total. There's 6 main ones. And you run there because nobody can touch you there. It's protected. It's
That's
protected.
no man's land and you're safe there.
You're safe there. At that point, one of the Levites will alert the Sanhedrin as to the fact that there is a case pending. We've got a new incoming panicky person, and we need to establish the facts and let's start the trial. They're either innocent or guilty or different degrees of negligence. But just run there to get protection. It's the first thing.
So once you're there and then they say, okay, you don't qualify to be here, they can then kick you out.
No. They have a trial. They escort you to a trial. Nobody can touch you. The relatives cannot touch you. They can only touch you upon outcome of trial if after you escorted back to the city of exile, you leave. But they can't attack you when you're collected for your case nor delivered after your case. But in the interim, from the accidental killing to that city, they can attack you. Or if it's deemed that you
Okay,
are guilty.
so basically you're safe unless you're found guilty, in which case you get stoned, whatever.
Well, if they can determine there's enmity or premeditation or something like that, sure. So they'll judge the severity of the case in terms of culpability. Absolutely.
Yeah. The other question also to do with the city of refuge is that just say you inadvertently kill somebody and you say, okay, you don't have to go there, but you will go there because you
You
don't
have
want
to.
someone's relative
You
coming
want
after
to
you.
you